Leadership is the art of giving people a platform for spreading ideas that work. Welcome to DC Local Leaders, the podcast where we talk to C-suite leaders within the DC area. Our guests share their pathways to success and the important moments that impacted their careers. Lean in as we get the inside scoop on how they are shaping their industries, how they lead, manage, and connect with others. From the sectors of aerospace, defense, tech, IT, and more, this is Local Leaders. Your host has been making meaningful connections with industry leaders for over 15 years. Here's Philip Nathram.
Hello and welcome. Welcome back to the DC Local Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Nathram, and today's guest is Sumeet Shrivastava. Sumeet is the CEO and president of Array, a technology firm based right here in Northern Virginia. They specialize in helping our federal government, predominantly in defense. Sumeet, not only is he the leader of Array, he is a huge Star Wars fan and a firm believer in the power of philanthropy. He spends a lot of his personal time dedicating to George Mason University and helping that school grow, the business school, helping them give back to other entrepreneurs and other leaders in our area that want to better themselves, that want to learn a new skill. He's a big proponent of continuing to learn. He talks about that. If you're growing your business, you need to continue to be learning. He takes us through the inflection points of small business, from adding that first employee all the way through deciding whether or not you want to stay a lifestyle business. Do you want to compete in a higher market? How do you scale? What are the appropriate positions to put in place in order to do that? Just a wealth of knowledge for any leader, any aspiring entrepreneur. I hope that you enjoy this episode. And thank you again to everyone who's been liking our content. As I said before, our website is coming out within the next couple of weeks. We're putting the final touches on there. One of the things we're going to be able to do is those Mindset Maker Book Club. It's all the books that we talk about on the podcast with our entrepreneurs, with our leaders, as well as anything else that people have sent in. We do a recap of what we learned from there just to help you decompress that information. We're looking forward to that coming out. And again, DC Local Leaders is continuing to host Let's Talk Tech with NVTC. That's a partnership between Northern Virginia Technology Council and DC Local Leaders. And again, I do want to say that we're big fans of Notecast. Notecast is a veteran-owned company. They're good friends of the show. They've started an app, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. It's exactly what it sounds like. You can take notes directly from the app while listening to a podcast. Notecast. Simply hit the button that says transcribe, and it will transcribe a note for you in the form of an audio note or a written note that you can then send to yourself. So please check those guys out. Big fans of the show. And so let's get into the episode. All right, Sumeet Shrivastava, Array Technologies. We're here. We're in your office in Chantilly, and I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with us. I'm really excited. Even from our first conversation, I can tell that you're just this wealth of knowledge of not just mindset and leadership, but of our specific technology and GovCon world, and I can't wait to get that on this podcast.
Well, I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and when you brought this up, it was really exciting, so thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about Array, what you guys do, how you get started, that sort of thing.
Sure. So Array's been around since 97, 24 years now. I actually came into Array about 12 years ago as part of the founder's intent to think about growing and scaling through his journey at the time. And so we were, I think, about 18 million in revenue at the time. So he had that decision he had to make of, do I want to sort of stay lifestyle and do I want to stay small business, or do I really want to scale? And he had some mentors. He came from a company called Multimax, which is now became part of Harris IT Services, and then Peraton, of course. With all of that, he called his mentors and basically said, what do I want to do? And so that's how I came in. And interestingly enough, we were what I would suggest is a typical Beltway bandit, a lot of 8A work, quite a few agencies that we were in, still trying to figure out where we wanted to go. And that really was why I was brought here, is to help with that strategy and figure out the post 8A strategy. And around 2010, we effectively began the journey that answers your question, which is today we're effectively, we're an application services firm that really leads with client intimacy, mostly around the defense space. So most of our business is defense oriented. And even within that sphere, heavy in the defense logistics arena. So the systems that enable your logistics and supply chain and analytics and maintenance operations. And so we work the IT and the application side of that. But, at its core, the 32nd would be a defense logistics oriented app services company.
What was it before?
Well, before I would say that it's what probably a lot of, your listeners are very familiar with in terms of the federal contracting marketplace. We built the company, or Brian Lung, he built the company as many entrepreneurs do, where you start by yourself, you're billing, you go through this process where at some point you can get out of the billing, which happens typically at 15, 20 people, kind of the first inflection point of the journey. And then you start hiring people to help go after and grow. And so in his case, he had the mentor-protege relationship with Multimax, and built around, in effect, a little bit of where they were, whether it was some Army, Air Force, State Department, Homeland Security. So a lot of places, but still at 18 million. And so a typical challenge, because now you're thinking, you've hit this next inflection point where you're trying to think, what do I do next? Do I keep trying to grow? Do I not? And you're still struggling, though, to kind of figure out who you really are. So we had IT work in applications and infrastructure and networking and VTC. We were actually doing some translation work for the State Department in Southwest Asian languages and Chinese. As a country, we were dealing with obviously those issues, and so we were a little bit of everything. And so during that time, that was the time where we looked, and we were around 30 million at that point, where we said there's this $4 million piece of array that as we look at the market and we look at what we think we want to be on the other side as hopefully somebody who can compete against your typical names, the CACIs and the Perspective / Peritons or GDIT, Serco, Deloitte, Accenture. I mean, those are the typical people we'd compete with. What does that look like? And that's why we picked this sort of $4 million piece. We took the rest of the company and sort of ran that. Okay, we got to complete those contracts. We got to do whatever we can to extend them. But really what we're doing is moving that and investing in this $4 million Air Force defense logistics system environment, and then trying to grow that. And today we're now $70 million in mostly that space.
So you got a singular focus at that point. And you mentioned something very specific. It was an inflection point. Yeah. So you mentioned two. Right? The first one.
Yeah, the first one is, again, a journey that I think so many people are familiar with is that entrepreneurial spirit and bug that hits somebody, and you say, hey, I'm working for, in this case, Brian, with Multimax, but I want to start my own business. So you go to whomever and in this case, he goes to the Multimax owner and who was a personal and professional mentor and says, I want to start this thing, and they collaborate, and ultimately you start out. Now, for a lot of people, that might be going to a client and saying, look, I'm working for so-and-so, but I want to start my own. I've hung a shingle out there, and often in the small business space, that's easier to do, obviously, in federal. So now you're billing, and you're spending 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week doing nothing but billing, because you're covering your bills, you're covering your mortgage, you're paying for the groceries, all the things that as an individual entrepreneur you do. And then the journey starts where you start adding people. And that's where, typically I think in our space with federal IT, I've suggested that 15 to 20 people is probably the place where if you're living a reasonable lifestyle, that you're making enough margin that you can actually come out of the billing and actually be your own BD person.
And you think that's inflection point number
That's
two.
number one.
That's number one.
Number one is really when you're no longer having to bill.
So during this time, though, so if you in the case of Brian or just a normal person, at this point, are you outsourcing your benefits and your payroll, and everything is being outsourced? You're paying a fee for all of that, and you're focused on what? Just billing back the client? Yeah,
pretty much. I mean, you really aren't making enough money to have dedicated of anything, right? So you might be. Actually, in some cases, a lot of people, instead of having employees, might be actually bringing them in as 1099s. Mm-hmm. They're billing through your rates and all that, but you're not taking on all of those responsibilities of providing a benefit and all that. And of course, ACA changed some of that, where now there were some options with the exchanges and other things for people to buy. But it's a mix of that W-2 and 1099, and you're definitely buying fractions of stuff. And in a lot of cases, you're doing it yourself, right? This is one of the things about entrepreneurship in the early days, something I've never truly experienced in my career, where you're your own bookkeeper. You're the one going up on the websites and trying to figure out, what does a teaming agreement look like? And but this is also where it becomes really important to have those mentors in the community. So when you do start to know that, hey, I can call this person and if nothing else, have them review a document for me, or have them tell me what's the best way for me to go buy some insurance or provide a benefit plan of some sort. But it's a real struggle at that smaller stage. And I think in most cases, you're right. It's outsourced in some way or done by yourself.
So at that inflection point, number one, is that where you came into Array when they were at number one, more or less?
I was more at 3.
You were at
3. Yeah.
So what's the second one?
Yeah, the second one is when you start to get to 50 employees, when you start to have a certain amount of scale, and it's different for different kind of regulations, but that 50 is pretty critical, where Department of Labor starts to pay interest. You start to potentially get on the radar for audits and EEOC compliance and things like that. And so that becomes the next point where you really have to now think about the maturity of those business processes. The question you just asked, where can I really afford to do my own bookkeeping, or do I need to have a little better books? You may not still be audited, but you still need to have maybe reviews, and you now need to have certain data that you capture about the people that you're hiring, and even the people you're recruiting, and your method of recruitment, and are you really opening yourself up, opening the aperture on the sources, right? Because again, EOC compliance, for example. So I think that's inflection point 2 is not just the scale, but the maturity of your back office and the things you're now doing and investing in, or should be investing in, so you don't get in trouble later. That's inflection point 2. And then as you go through that, let's say that's 50, I call inflection point 3, really in our world, we're so driven by the NAICS code that we are in, and what those graduation numbers look like. So if you're in federal IT at 30 million, to me, it's the half-life. What I call the half-life is really inflection point 3, which is the point in time where you're in that 15, maybe 20 million, sort of the halfway point of the journey. And you really have to make a decision at that time. Am I in this for the long haul, and am I in this to scale the business? And do I want to go through the 30 million or build a lifestyle business? And I think in federal in particular, at inflection point 3, the majority of companies are probably best positioned to stay a lifestyle business, stay small, stay in your socioeconomic categories, and work at the 15 to 20 million level and not even worry about graduation. And then finally, inflection point 4 is you've decided, I want to scale. And it's really that post-graduation survival and everything you have to do to have built the company to sort of beat the big guys and stay afloat.
That was a great education for anyone who's an aspiring leader, whether they're aspiring entrepreneurs or someone who's more technical in their position that wants to be in more of a leadership role. Right. So tell me a little bit more about, along the way, you mentioned so many things there about mentorship and the importance of doing that and having that. What's been your experience with that, and how do you practice that? And what do you think that's really done for your ability to be at those inflection points and make the best decision?
Sure. I honestly, that's a very simple answer. It's my dad. So, Dad started his journey, and like many, immigrant stories, right? He came over here in the early 70s to do his computer science master's degree at Chapel Hill, UNC. And so I came along when I was 5. But there was something about that, the same parameters or the same characteristics that drive someone to leave their country and look for that better life here in the U.S., as many have done and have achieved. Probably the same characteristics that drive entrepreneurial spirit in many cases, right? You see this over and over again. And so he had that. And so when I was a junior in high school is when he started his company. And we were living here in Burke, so I was going to Robinson High School here in Fairfax. But he started his company junior year and did, and I watched from afar, just being the kid, to see that journey. And then as I came in, he was right around 11 million a year, I think, when he was really pushing me to come in. I had just gotten married, and he was like, hey, the company's going to grow and you really need to join. He was jumping from like 4 million to 11 million that year.
So was that inflection point number one, more or less?
Yeah, in his case, yeah, that was really the two, really, where he was. He had been doing some billing, but he at that point was also starting to run the company and all that, and he'd hired some people. So it was really that time where get in early and learn the back office and all that. So really to kind of get back to your question, that whole just watching Dad, and then Dad ends up with this amazing. The first 5 years that I worked in his organization, I didn't work for him directly for 5 years. So I was working with the controller and some others for a couple of years, actually. But during that time, he won the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. He won the SBA National Small Business Person of the Year Award. He got appointed in the mid-'90s to a Clinton Commission, White House Commission on minority small business contracting and sort of the macroeconomic stuff. So I'm watching all this happen, and I'm watching what he's doing, and it was just an incredible learning ground. So the whole 90s, my first third of my career, basically, I worked in Dad's organization before he sold it and learned quite a bit. But the other thing that was really neat and allowed me to kind of keep sort of engaged, in terms of learning and mentorship, is because he was so well known in the community, and in particular the Indian American community. He was also the co-founder and sort of the chairman of the of what is now Rajdhani Mandir, but the Indian temple in Western Fairfax County. So a lot of people were coming to him, and there's this next generation of entrepreneurs, especially in government contracting, that came to him, and they were probably closer to my age than they were his at that point, but that gave me this incredible ability from the inside to see the way he mentored people, the way, they responded, the things they did. There are 4 or 5 of them that all sold their companies. I mean, I think the least valued company of the sale was like $120 million, and some of them sold for $200 to $300 million. So you see that kind of journey also with all these other folks, and it was just an incredible learning experience. So I'd say, once again, just following Dad and trying to live up to what I saw him doing has sort of been my aspiration for 30 years now in the public sector. It's nowhere close to being there, but
Yeah, but I mean, I think the idea that he was your mentor, that you had a mentor and you watched him mentor other people, is huge, right?
Yeah,
because I think that what I found in most of the leaders that I've spoke to, whether they themselves were the person that founded a company or they were brought in as a part of a company and work their way through the ranks to be in a leadership role, whatever it is, they had people to look up to that were doing what they wanted to be doing, but then also those same people were turning around and helping others.
Yeah.
So having that lens or that experience of seeing that.
What's really interesting about that too, in terms of self-awareness, right, is I'm getting caught up at early on. Oh, Dad's this amazing entrepreneur. I'm starting to learn these stories which as a kid from the outside, he's just Dad. Right. When you're on the inside, you're seeing this. And I remember having this thing about entrepreneurship and what I thought it was. And a couple of years in, I remember in a board meeting or a senior staff meeting where I was pushing back on some stuff with Dad, right? And as a kid, as his son, I was probably able to push back a little more. And I remember him getting really mad, saying, "Well, you're not an entrepreneur." And it hurt. It was interesting. It hurt me at the time. But it also, in the follow-up conversations and in really sitting down with him, I started realizing that actually my passion is around operationalizing strategy. Where I didn't experience that, the fighting for survival as a single person entrepreneur and trying to get the second person build and the fourth. I didn't experience any of that in any part of my career. I was always coming in at, the smallest company was his when it was already getting to 11 million. And at Array, it was 18 million. And the company he sold to in between was $1 billion firm. But early, a couple of years in is when that mentorship and really the frankness of the conversation allowed me to start to really self-reflect about what I was, where my passions lay, and then realizing I'm not that type of entrepreneur. I'm an operator. And so anyway, it really is important to have that kind of person that you can have those very, very transparent conversations with.
Well, let's talk about, you just mentioned that you're an operator. Let's talk about that through the lens of Array.
Yeah.
Right. What kind of company culture do you have at Array? And if you consider yourself to be, sounds like part of the team and more of a leadership role within the team and less of like, I'm the entrepreneur and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the fact is that, the founder, I'm not the founder, right? I wasn't the person whose vision Array originally was. So when I came in, what's interesting is part of that conversation, I actually met, I think about 100 when I left Keen. So the company that bought Dad in December 99 was Keen, which is now NTT Data. And so I was there for 7-8 years, and that was a great experience. But when I left, I was actually, my fourth child had just been born, my daughter, after 3 sons. And I was going to take the rest of the year off. I was going to hang at home. I was going to get to know my kids again, all that kind of stuff. And I probably met about 100 folks during the next 6 to 9 months, right? Entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I was really looking for was an organization and an entrepreneur in particular whose vision met mine when it came to corporate culture, when it came to the fact that, I think there's a strong humility that goes with really building the kind of culture you have, where you have to sort of let it subsume. I mean, you have to have the vision, but you also have to, allow for others to come into that mix. You have to, create that diversity of thought and have an inclusive culture. And with Brian, I mean, there were a few that I met, but Brian just took it to another level. And I was like, this is a guy I can work for. And in particular, because they were at a certain size, which was very important to me because it was just big enough where I didn't have to worry about those things I knew I was weak in, right? Which that early stage survival. But they had some infrastructure, but it allowed me after, what effectively was the first 20 years of my career to play out this hypothesis about culture, to play out the thing that if we really build a small business emerging story that Array was interested in, I could bring some folks in that I'd met over the years that had that same belief where, you'd sit around and say, wow, I wish my company was like. And what Brian was, we were blessed to be able to do is come together as a team. So I brought in folks who were former clients, former employees, former competitive partners that I hated losing to, but really respected. And that initial management team was made up of those folks. And we brought with us this idea that we will embody what we always said we wanted our companies to embody. That really became it. And it was a culture where we were all, I'd run a $200 million organization before I came here. Another gentleman came here who was, had run a $180 million company. So we came together with the idea that although we weren't previous owners of companies, we had run some pretty mature organizations, and yet we were really roll up the sleeves people. We loved getting into the mix of things. We loved walking around. It didn't matter what role you had in the company. There was no hierarchy, which was a little odd for the defense people who were coming in because they were used to very hierarchical. But what you found is that there were people that really wanted that. And so we have this very walk around culture. My first weekend, just running coffee runs for the proposal team and being the person checking the books and stuff, because I'm not a tech writer. I didn't grow up technical, so I never really wrote a proposal in my life. And yet, I'm running this company, which is all about, in our industry, doing RFP responses. So, but it was that kind of culture. And then just getting out of people's way, right? When you're hiring these people that you respect like you do, you need to empower them. And so we did this interesting study just 2.5 years ago, where we had an independent firm come in, actually a group from George Mason, a capstone team that was in their knowledge management team. And it was very interesting because we said, we're starting with a whiteboard. We're not going to tell you, and we don't want to say this is the culture. We've never done a culture study. You go figure out what you think or what our employees think our culture is. And they came back and they basically said there are 3 words that sort of have come out of the work that your employees effectively say is the culture of the company, and you've never, ever stated it. We didn't come out and say, here's our value system. We just behaved the way we wanted everyone to behave, and we hired people that we would allow for that. And the 3 words were family, empowerment, and impact. And then the supporting stuff was family was really around, we have people that, support us. It feels like a unit. Leaders are accessible. We feel like they have our back. We can take risks. We can be ourselves, right? We can effectively be who we are, and we're not forced to conform or any of that. So that was sort of the words around family. Empowerment was they let us do what we need to do to get the job done. We do feel empowered. We feel tooled. We feel like we get what we need to actually do what's most important for our clients and execute. And impact was that we have that communication environment where we're seeing the impact to our careers, we're seeing the impact we're having to the company, and we can see the impact we have with our clients, and we see the reward systems and the communications that support that. And that's like motherhood and apple pie in our business. When you're hearing that back and saying that's what they think of you without you even talking about it, that's probably the most pride I take of anything we've done at Array is having built a culture without talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best explanations of what the company culture has been. It came out organically. You didn't create it. It was given to you by the employees because that's what they felt.
Right.
And I can tell by listening to you that it makes sense why they would feel that way.
So.
You're just energetic and just a champion of what you do.
Thank you.
Where does that come from? Do you have? I mean, where did you learn those? Are you reading anything? Are you following people? I mean, I do a lot of work on a morning routine and follow a number of different people between Brene Brown and Tim Ferriss, and the list goes on. Mickey Singer, and a whole meditation routine, cold showers, like a whole thing, just to have this sort of mindset. You seem to just. It seems organic.
Well, yeah. I don't know if it's organic. I would say this, and you'll probably get tired of this. This is what I saw Dad doing. I mean,
where did he get it from? Do you know? Did you watch? Were you able to see that?
I think in watching him, I mean, I think of like even before he started the company and the way people were attracted to him. He was a genuine person. He was highly, competent in what he did, but he had a passion about, one of the things that he was passionate about when he started the temple was he wanted it to be a temple for the common man. One thing, for those listeners that might not be too familiar with this, but, India, and you think about Indian immigrants, I mean, we're a bunch of smaller communities, right? Because India itself wasn't really a nation until it became a nation in 47. Until then, it was a bunch of princely estates and, under this East India Company thing. But you think about the pedigree and one of the things I saw with Dad is he didn't care what part, of India you came from, right? Like to him, the important thing about this temple and the important thing about what he was doing in the community was we could be South Indians, we could be North Indians, we could be Punjabis, Biharis, Gujaratis. It really didn't matter to him. He wanted, and he had this strong philosophy that if we're going to be a community here in this land away from our homeland, then it needed to be a community for everyone. It needed to be a community for the common man. And honestly, it didn't matter if you were Hindu or Jain or, whatever subset of sort of Hinduism or Buddhism. He accepted it all. And I saw that with him right from early on, as far as I can remember. So I would say that, and he applied that in the company. Like, it was amazing to me that he could go there and he knew everyone's name. He knew their spouses' names. We're 600 people at this point. And yet he had this, an amazing ability to just connect with anyone that he worked with. And the hierarchy didn't mean anything. Now, he's chairman of the board, chairman of the temple. You still have to assert certain things about vision and all that. And, that would come out. His temper would come out sometimes too, as it did with me at that meeting. But the way he treated people and the kinds of things he did to make everyone feel like they were part of something bigger. Like I said, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to emulate as much of that as I can and drive it home and get a fraction of the achievement he had. But I'll tell you, everything started with that. And
but talk to me a little bit about your individual.
Yeah,
I know you've got a lot of kids. Well, not a lot, but you've got.
It is a lot.
I don't know why I don't know why I said it that way. You've got some kids.
Yeah.
You've got a family, is how I should say that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And do you have a morning routine? What does your morning look like? Do you have an evening routine?
So interesting. It's evolved quite a bit over the years, right? So I would say that there is a routine now that is about the kids that is relatively new. And I'd say it's a little bit of what attracted me to Array, but an environment that allows us to be who we are again. And I missed out in the 90s, so my oldest is 29, the next one's 24. So they were born in the 90s, and then two more that were born in 2004, 2008. So, while I was at Keene. And I realized that whether it was in the 90s working for Dad, where I was trying to prove I wasn't there just for nepotism purposes, but that I really deserve to be there. So you're working a lot more than I should have, which meant that the older kids probably didn't get anywhere near as much time with me. Then I go through that Keene period of 8 years where the next two were born, and they were early enough now. And I'd sort of learned enough, but it was still, we were going through acquisition. We were a publicly traded company. So there are other things that come with that. And I started realizing that I had been missing out on stuff. And I also started realizing that, there were things that were really important to me, and they were about the kids. They were actually common experiences. I'm a huge sports fan, and I was missing out on all that. I'm a big book reader, and I would normally read one novel a week on average for many years. And then all that time I stopped reading. And I realized how much I was missing that. Huge science fiction fan, all this stuff. Now I own 700 Star Wars books and I've read all of them, right? 15 bookshelves worth of fiction, nonfiction at home that, I've gone through. So that really only happened in the last 10 years. And it's, something I would tell people that are listening, that I awakened, I think, to what I wanted to be and should be a lot later. Despite all that I just said about Dad and all that, I spent so much time working on my career. Then rather than realizing that I think there is, this adage of a marathon, right? Life is that. So now my morning routine inevitably starts with waking up the kids. I love being their alarm clock. I probably baby them a little too much, but waking them up, helping with breakfast, helping them get off to school when they were going to school. Now it's just back to the bedroom to do virtual training online. But I like to do that. And usually what I do is I get up a little earlier than them and I catch up on overnight stuff. I catch up on news. But basically from about 6:30 to 9, I'm just in my own relaxed state. And I don't do yoga and I don't do the cold showers, but really it's the stuff that I'm passionate about. So I'll read a book. I've always got it. Right now, well, the new High Republic series came out for Star Wars. So there's it's many generations before what we all know to be the Star Wars canon. So it's starting in effect a new canon there. But I also right now I just finished. There's a book that I read that every year at least once, which called the Why Philanthropy Matters, and it was another thing emanating from Dad and the culture of philanthropy I saw with him. But I use that to remind myself all the time that no matter what we do, we still have this bigger purpose in life. Yeah. And so why philanthropy matters. And then the other thing that was, I just finished, given our space, I love Grisham. I love Vince Phelan. I love that area. But Chris Whipple just put out a new book, I think in the fall, The Spy Masters, an update to that, which is about the history of basically CIA directors. And that was a really cool, just sort of connects to the nonfiction passion and the fiction passion effectively with GovCon as well as, that genre. So,
yeah. So you mentioned something earlier when you were speaking about, and it sounded like you were saying, like there was some feelings or some emotions about of belonging. Do I belong here or am I just here because my father owns the company and I'm put here that I don't actually deserve it? Yep. Talk to me about what was going through your mind or how you worked through that or what that felt like in the first place and then what you did. And when did you actually start feeling like, you know what, I've learned what I needed to learn and I am a leader and I can do this?
Probably never during the time I was working for him. And so he, I started in 91. He started me in the back office. So I never really got in front of clients. I wasn't ever billing on site. I never had that side of the business. So I found myself, he moved me around the back office and basically said, you need to really understand how a company operates. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I'd just done my MBA at George Mason. So the other thing was, doing my MBA and that started to give me a little confidence because now I'm in this class and I was 8 years younger. It was an executive MBA, that Friday, Saturday kind of thing.